Unless you're really well informed on what exactly the game is, there's a good chance Atomfall is a very different experience from what you expect. From its aesthetic, to its marketing material, to the conversation around it, Atomfall has been perceived as a Fallout, but with, like, Warburtons bread and a local Sainsbury's. The reality is more small in scope, more unique, and frankly, much more exciting to me than that. There's something very special here, you just have to let it show you. I think a lot of people will dislike Atomfall, and frankly, that's for a good reason. Many of the elements I'll get into here will be the exact things people dislike, and those elements either aren't quite as important to me, or the restrictions they make to the game are part of why I found this game to be so special. I love Stalker, Vampire the Masquerade, and a whole host of very flawed PC classics, and Atomfall gives me a similar feeling as I play. Waking up in a bunker with no memory of why you were there, your slumber is interrupted by a scientist who is bleeding out who offers you a keycard to your escape if you can patch him up. A very basic setup that also teaches you crafting. You can help him or kill him to get a hold of that card, and this gets you out into the surface. The world out there is no better than the bunker, as this is where you find out you are, unfortunately, stuck in England. In England, in the middle of a quarantine zone after a fictionalised take on the real-life Windscale nuclear accident, but England nonetheless. Spooky stuff. This accident sees the rise of bands of wandering outlaws, a Wicker Man-style cult known as the Druids, and mutated animals and people who have succumbed to a growing fungus-like infection stemming from the glowing reactor you see in the distance. This isn't all you'll see, of course, but these are some of the main enemies you'll come across. When I say Atomfall isn't like Fallout, I mean it. The game is much smaller in scope, there's only a handful of locations you move back and forth between, and you can technically finish it in about 5 hours if you know what you're doing ahead of time. Without any skips, glitches, or technical knowledge of how the game works on a mechanical level, it's intended to be small, and the main quest is mostly just you trying to escape, teaming up with whoever you can to do so. I think the game compares better to a mixture of Stalker, Deathloop, or even a survival horror like Resident Evil at parts. We'll get a little more into those comparisons later, but it's important to note that size allows it to tell fewer stories and therefore let them breathe. It can pepper notes and layers throughout locations without having to neatly end everything lest you get lost in the pages of journals and quest logs. I liked almost every story told to some degree and combed through the notes it threw at me, reading pretty much every one. See, the likes of Skyrim is often so big that A, its narrative structure becomes a tad inconsistent for me, and B, there's so much to do that I often end up tuning out. Stories in Atomfall are less grand and overarching. Though notes of that melody is carried on the wind and you get to hear the sound of drums pounding from a distance, the full song is only a few minutes long. It thrashes and rages, then resides as you continue through the album. A baker trying to keep the lights on after the end of her world as her husband succumbs to the rot that is currently spreading across quarantine. A woman who lost her mental faculties before all of this, who can't seem to comprehend what's going on, and the trail of sadness around her that makes you kinda glad she doesn't understand what's happening. A church with a dead body and the deals you make to hide it from the implied corruption and authority of the militia that is now quote-unquote protecting the town. It all has these strands of stories, and you can effectively pick them up anywhere via the lead system. This is an effective way of getting to the heart of what makes Atomfall's best stories work, and makes them rather fun to run through one more time. When you first leave that bunker, you aren't given any real direction. A phone box rings in front of you and tells you to hunt down Oberon after then, or instead, should you choose to ignore the call, you pick a direction and walk until you hit a landmark, a note, or someone's face. A cave to your right leads you to a very helpful miner who is hearing voices. You can pick up strands of ways in which people fight those voices and areas this cave leads to, but you aren't given a quest to follow per se. Instead, you tuck a note away and start to peel back the world more. Some notes simply give you coordinates and you use your map to take the trek out. I have seen 4 or so endings, and I'm trying to chase another between the time I record this video and the time it goes live. However, I sat down to write this script only to find out I'd lost all of my footage of the first 5 or so hours of the game. To avoid spoiling many of Atomfall's later sections, I restarted the game once more to get some B-roll. In this time, I managed to find a lot of those quests again, and even found fun new ways of exploring them. Information given to you in a certain sequence can affect the way that sequence plays out. It's much more scripted and less organic than the likes of the logic system in, say, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, but it goes a long way to make quests feel not so random. I had so many, that's how you're supposed to start this story moments, And knowing where the story goes lets me appreciate the nuanced ways Atomfall chooses to tell them. Take the baker I mentioned before. If you don't get information on her husband before meeting her, she won't just tell you about him. Why would she tell you? She is deathly afraid that this news getting out to the protocol, the army guarding the town she resides in, would result in his death and possibly hers. However, if you go upstairs to just outside the locked room he's in, you can see the faint glow of the spores of that mushroom-like entity that grows from the plant. It's only light and would be ignored by most players, but it feels rewarding to feel like the game is still alive even when you haven't found it yet. Exploration is similar. Taking notes from the likes of immersive sims, almost every single path and house has multiple entryways, holes to squeeze through or doors to shoot through. Most questlines have a way you're urged to figure out, but others will end abruptly if you end up with just the wrong concoction of people in a place at the wrong time. It's not an immersive sim, but the influence is clear here, and the smaller world allows Atomfall to jam it full of bunkers, houses, and extra NPCs. The lead system isn't just a clever way to avoid bloating the game UI with quest markers, it also sets the world up for if you choose to go on a rampage and kill every NPC. It allows you to connect back to the story if you've killed someone important, and for that reason no one person is your salvation. If you don't like someone, their quest, or whatever the game wants you to do something else. It's not entirely open-ended, but it's just open enough that I always felt rewarded for doing just a little more than the questline might suggest. Though there are traditional quest lines, the lead system is effectively an information resource that can tie quests to broader pieces of notebooks and things you've heard, radio samples you find, people you talk to. The lead system, as it's named, is intended to invoke imagery of a detective, and it does work well. Whatever difficulty you feel most comfortable playing the game on, I'd advise turning it up just a little more. The game splits into a handful of categories when choosing difficulty, and this affects the combat elements, survival elements, and exploration. On harder exploration difficulties, you are given less and less UI and quest tracking and can function off coordinates and word of mouth alone. Exploration is so much better when you use only the notes to guide you to the next location. For this same reason, I'd advise turning up the difficulty of combat. Fights become a puzzle you figure out through a mixture of planning and exploration. Atomfall takes from its real-life counterpart in more than just the event and location. In 1957, when the nuclear accident happened, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan intentionally distorted, obfuscated, and covered up the event and its consequences for fear of what it would do to the public perception of nuclear power. It was linked to hundreds of cases of cancer and no mass evacuation took place. This was not the only time lives were put in danger this decade from nuclear power and radiation, then covered up or ignored by the British government. There's a conspiracism and shadowy cabal implied to be at work in Atomfall that plays into not only the main story nicely, but offers a sharp and distinct difference from the quaint villages of northern England the game faithfully draws from. There's something really dark just out of shot in every inch of Atomfall, and both its central quests and side stories hint at it well. It rarely materializes into a sharp or biting criticism, but conjures a vibe well. The stereotypical British stiff upper lip is a farce, and occasionally a weapon, and Atomfall knows that well. Speaking of weapons, I'd describe Atomfall's combat as satisfyingly clunky. It takes a moment to wind up your cricket bat and a couple of good strikes to kill basic enemies. Ferals, which are the sprinting end result of those nuclear plant spores, are very deadly early on and will kill you in a few hits. These are one of many ways the game organically stops you from sprinting through and grabbing all the important bits quickly. You soon piece together that winning combat often involves spacing out enemies, placing well-timed kicks to stagger and pummeling them until they stop moving. Once the game moves on to guns, they kill instantly in well-placed locations and ammo is constantly fleeting. This means the sound of a crunching headshot isn't just satisfying for its smoothness, but nearly necessary if you want to build up your supplies for the next combat. The game's stamina system is your heartbeat. The more activities you do and longer you run in a row, the higher your heartbeat goes. This results in a thumping on the controller, darkening of sides of the screen, and less accurate swings. It's a very natural limiting system that stops you from just running and gunning. Bows are perhaps my favourite weapon in the game because of how satisfying a hit is, but it takes a good time to draw back the bow, so it becomes nearly infeasible in groups up close. If you want to even the odds, you can craft bandages to heal or grenades to throw. Long-term, skill points can be gained from finding stimulants, and these can be sunk into a handful of light skill trees. The skill point system doesn't really add very much to the game and largely feels like an afterthought, but giving you access to the ability to craft weapons or increased bow draw time is certainly a boon. As well as finding skill points, you have to find some skills in the form of skilled books or even via some quest routes, which you can then spend those points on. In a way, I'm glad Atomfall only lightly commits to its skill trees because it means most of the growth you'll go through as you play is down to your own knowledge base. Running through the starting area again, I had reset my skills, but felt much more competent at actually taking on the hordes. Though Atomfall is technically a survival crafter, I wouldn't say it commits very much to that either. Here is one of many points I could see contention arising. You have limited inventory space to put weapons and items, but also to put resources. Once you start to learn the game, things like cloth and alcohol become things you ignore in chests, and therefore searching becomes less satisfying. As well as this, though the main enemies stay down and often give you a thread of lore to start pulling at, bands of roaming enemies respawn, which puts the economy of items out of whack. I often felt like I got through an encounter through the skin of my teeth, only to step out for a moment and respawn them. This is one of a few ways the identity of Atomfall gets lost as you play. This crisis even rears its head in the game's guns. As you continue to play, you can unlock a skill to upgrade certain weapons by effectively combining them, and can then get skills to shoot better, faster, stronger, harder, etc. You only have 4 quick slots for weapons and items, and then 4 spaces in your inventory for the bigger weapons. This means you can't really use all that many at a time, and looting a body for their rifles so you can upgrade your current one often means finding a lockbox, putting your stuff in there, heading back to the body you killed, picking up their gun, going back to the lockbox, then upgrading them. Moving through inventory and boxes is also a problem when you have more than 10, as it's slow and resets every time you grab or use something. This is all an ordeal that makes inventory management a pain. Luckily, given resource stockpiles are limited in your inventory, you won't need to move things around all that often anyway. I played Atomfall on PS5 and it runs in both a graphical and technical sense very well. Other than silly AI decisions, I basically had no problems. It looks great, its aesthetic is clear and pronounced with a unique style while also being legible and clear to understand. It's a game that benefits greatly from an SSD given how much time you spend moving from one zone to another. It does do a good job at linking them though, and it's very rare there's not more than a few ways to get into an area. Sometimes finishing a quest requires finding an item lying on a table or on a stand, and the game doesn't particularly care if you miss it. Atomfall won't place a big arrow next to the item you need to grab, lest you get lost. However, you can equip a flashlight that will not only illuminate the dark, but highlight objects you can pick up. As well as this, you can find a metal detector which allows you to find caches or lunchboxes filled with items, and one last tool for getting through electronics. There's an almost Metroidvania style approach to that last one, and it will often encourage you to go hunting through previous areas in the hopes that it'll open up new doors. In many cases, it does. Combat isn't the only thing that tries to make Atomfall feel lively as you make your way through it. Traders pop up throughout zones, and these not only offer useful items like recipes to craft and skill books to learn, they offer information. However, that information comes at the cost of your friendship and commerce, and it doesn't come cheap. As you get friendly with traders, they may let you know who else they've sold to, or might tell you of weird happenings over yonder. The game opts to remove currency entirely and trade purely through barter. Maybe I can trade 2 cakes for 1 bandage, saving room in my inventory, then maybe that bandage can be traded alongside a gun for an atomic battery. Trading is almost its own language that is learned as you figure out what to steal from bodies. Language is also, well, a language, and dialogue options are given a small preamble telling you how your approach will be perceived. If you are open-minded and curious about the gentleman hearing voices, maybe he'll give you a lead. If you are honest with the woman guessing you're from the village, maybe she'll respect that. It's like a blend between traditional dialogue choices and Fallout 4's much more maligned vibes-based answers, and it works really well. That open-ended questline system can be a double-edged sword. In my first playthrough, I found a piece of paper in a cache with my metal detector, which then sent me to a person hidden in a nearby barn in search of an item, which then sent me chasing a cache in the wake of a roadblock that ended deadly, only to find the item tucked away in a bunker. I felt quite cool unraveling this mystery, only to later find the same item in a supply closet. This means that knowledge on the game will let you skip stories, which can be quite rewarding for replays, but Atomfall can occasionally struggle to really incentivize you to search for the items it holds. Luckily, notes, recordings, and general lore in the world are intriguing enough to peel away at that I didn't really mind. Atomfall is a flawed game, but one I found myself enjoying quite a lot. I've spoken to a few other people who have played it pre-release and found out that they all either dislike or found themselves finding the game okay, and I think their rationalizations are wholly justified. The length of the game, some of its structures, and some of its decisions will likely anger or infuriate some, but I found the entire affair incredibly charming. This is the second game in just over a month that will be hurt by a comparison to Bethesda, and this is at least partly down to the conversation around the game before it launched. Atomfall is not as wacky or ironic as the majority of post-nuclear post-apocalypses. It certainly has a dark, almost black humour in moments that feels reminiscent of Raymond Briggs's When the Wind Blows. Its darkness is very British in that sort of I'll just walk it off after my leg is blown off sort of way. A stiff upper lip that now sits on the concrete thanks to that atomic blast. Atomfall is not hundreds of hours long. It isn't filled with 30-hour questlines, huge skill trees, and tons of ways to customize and upgrade your character. It doesn't even have a character creator. It's a much smaller affair and much more tightly packed as a result. It is, however, very charming, satisfying to learn, and a joy to explore. Just this month, the CEO of Rebellion, the company behind Atomfall, said that its lack of layoffs, unlike much of the rest of the industry, could be at least partially attributed to the fact the studio brings in its scope and makes these projects more tightly focused. There's definitely a pull at work with Atomfall that feels like the lasso has been tied around the developer's legs just too late to stop it stumbling, but in my time with the game, it never directly fell, and in those moments where its tighter focus aligns with its vision, the cloud lifts and the glow of that bomb sure does shine bright. Those are some of my thoughts on Atomfall. I'm going to continue playing it here and there, get some more thoughts as I go, but I'm confident in where I've settled on that, which is funny because I'm actually not that confident about it. I flip between this is really good to that doesn't work. And I think it kind of made me cheer for Atomfall in a weird way. I definitely think that someone might see this and say, wow, you could finish this in 5 hours and it's $70. And I don't really have much to say to that. I think that's a fair point not to buy it. And I think there's plenty of things. Ooh, just hit my water off the side of the desk. I think there's plenty of things in here that could put someone off, and I think you'd be rightly put off. I think that this is going to be a very mixed affair. I think there's going to be a lot of negative reviews, and I don't think I'm really going to disagree with any of them. And that's a weird feeling. I could have just given the negatives I found, which is quite a few, but I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to give how I felt, even though it's a bit messy. This is a good game in a lot of ways, and I really liked it. If you are the type of person like me and the things that I've said I like, you like, then I think you'll probably enjoy this. If not, wait for a sale and pick it up then. Either way, thank you for watching. Thank you for maybe liking, even if you've disliked or whatever, that's fine. If you want to see more things like this, subscribing really helps me out. I think I'm pretty close to 700 now, which seems absurd to me. I remember hitting 500 and thinking that was a wild milestone. I don't know how I mispronounced that. Anyway, I would really appreciate if you subscribed. That would be very cool. And let me know what you've been playing. Thanks.